We're not going to sit on the island talking to your eating disorder for the rest of your life.
Right.
There is light, this is possible.
Welcome to this week's episode of the Uncovery podcast. My name is Maddie and I'm recovering from anorexia and I talk about it on this podcast. All right, what are we getting into today? What is an update I can give you today? Here's an update. I am in shambles. I'm in physical shambles. I am not generally a person that gets injured. I don't play sports. Maybe that's why. I don't take on excess risk, perhaps. Maybe that's why. I do a bunch of, yoga. I keep myself limber. So it's always a shock and a devastation when things don't go right, especially physically, for reasons that you can imagine and we'll get into. But since arriving in London, I guess it's been 3 weeks almost. I came right away, within the first couple of days, I got this wild pain, behind my right shoulder blade. Does anybody care about that? Whatever, I'm telling you anyway, because it does actually relate to the eating disorder. Okay, I got pain, behind my shoulder blade, just kind of, when it feels like you need your back cracked and you just can't quite twist in the right way to crack that particular part of your back? That's what it felt like. But it started getting progressively worse and I couldn't roll it out. I couldn't crack it. I couldn't get it out. And I ended up going to the chiropractor because it started getting so painful that I couldn't reach for anything without really feeling it. And I'd never been to a chiropractor before because I have this absolute committed opinion that they will just break your neck, that they'll just crack it too hard and your life's over. And I'm petrified of this idea. And so I've avoided chiropractors. I've never really had any interest in them. I was desperate. I was I just need somebody to crack my back. And the thing is that because I'm in London, yes, I know people here, but I'm not staying with anybody here. I'm not with anybody on a day-to-day basis who I could just be can you please walk on me or lift me up and crack my back, please? So I go to this chiropractor and he explains the whole thing to me. He does it. He's trying to make me more relaxed and comfortable because actually that helps, you got to be kind of loose in order for them to really do your adjustments, I guess. Anyway, he explains the whole thing to me. I feel very comfortable. He seems well-trained, whatever. And he does these adjustments on me. But apparently one of my legs was longer than the other one. Fix that and fix the, alignment of my hips a little bit. Great, fantastic. Then he gets going on the actual spot of interest. And it can't be cracked out. It's actually a soft tissue thing underneath it. Great. So then he goes in on it manually, and then he goes in on it with this, it's basically an industrial strength massage gun. Insane. Really, really painful. And he's this will potentially hurt for a while. He's it might be a couple weeks before this feels better. And this was almost 2 weeks ago. Finally, this last week, it starts to feel better because before that, I was kind of miserable. And it really affects your mood when you're in pain. And as somebody that has never experienced chronic pain or physical ailments of that kind, this was new to me. And silver lining of all of this, just as an aside, is the empathy that I now have for people that have ongoing chronic physical pain is through the roof. I can't imagine what that's like. I have this little tiny piece of it right now, and I'm just I feel miserable. I don't want to do stuff. I don't want to move around because every time you move, something hurts. Okay. So that starts to get better kind of over time. And then a couple of days ago, I start to get this kind of achy joint pain in sort of my left hip socket and very, very, very low back, almost sacrum, but just to the left, sort of near that hip. I think that if I rest it, it will alleviate. I'm taking some meds, some paracetamol and ibuprofen, which for which is just what they call them here in the UK. It's just like Advil and Tylenol basically, but it's a combination, which is fine to take. That's not like against recommendations or whatever. I'm taking maybe a little more than the recommended dose, but it's okay. It's fine. So I'm taking that. I'm thinking that might help. And then this morning I get up and I like cannot walk without my entire left side of my body being like an 8 out of 10 pain. I've never experienced anything like this. I'm almost buckling every time I take a step. So I'm like, oh my God, this is not what I need. Like, I'm only in London for a bit. I want to like feel like I want to go out and do stuff. I want to go walk around. It's really cramping my style to have been in this upper back shoulder pain for the first, 2.5 weeks of this trip. And now to have this, I'm like, are you kidding me? So anyway, I go to urgent care and now I'm on drugs, anti-inflammatories. I'll be on a muscle relaxant. It's apparently he thinks it's something with like the ligaments around my hip joint could have jarred it somehow. He's like, taking a step wrong or doing one thing can just kind of tweak it. You just need to like have some anti-inflammatories for a few days and it should sort itself out. Great, fantastic. But I'm going to tell you about what my brain has been doing as a result of my physical body being in pain and not being mobile. It has brought to the surface in a very real way the attachment to movement and exercise. Perhaps not as sorted as I had hoped. I have known that there is like a lingering attachment to this for a while, and it's something that I'm working on in recovery over time, because it is more difficult for me than the food piece. The food piece is actually somewhat easier for me to nudge in the right direction over time. And I've come leaps and bounds that I'm feeling really, really free and good about food for the most part. But exercise is stickier. And that this is like really kind of brought that to the surface, because I can't do anything. I can't even walk around the block right now, like yesterday, last night, and today. And that's awful. Like that, my brain is doing backflips as a result. And so it's very interesting. And maybe this is the silver lining, is that like, this is a thing that I have to confront and realize is like, you have to be able to take full rest, right? Because I've been taking full rest and I really haven't been exercising very much at all lately. And yet the ability to do a bit or to do weightlifting or whatever it is, like the not being able to even walk is very distressing to me. So partially just because of the pain, but I think partially because of the attachment to movement that I still on some low level kind of have. So that's kind of just like a vulnerable share, because I never want to come across as like, she's got it all figured out and she's done, she's in the clear, because I'm not. Obviously there's like these little parts, little corners of still working on eating disorder stuff. Because even if the movement isn't excessive, right? Like even if it's not, you're running miles and you don't need to be doing that and you're over exercising, whatever, that part is definitely not the case anymore. But the mental gymnastics of wanting to change the way I'm eating, or thinking that I should change the way I'm eating, or thinking that I should push through and take myself on a walk, just the thoughts of those is like the dust that I still need to like clean up in this eating disorder. So that's been very interesting. And basically I have no choice, because I'm in so much pain that I am going to just have to deal with this. And I'm going to have to sort of get over this very confronting little piece of the eating disorder that seems to be hanging around while laying down and editing podcasts and watching Netflix on my laptop and feeling a little bit sorry for myself, which I hate, because I've been feeling so happy and sparkly and great lately. And I just am like, this is why when things are going well, we all think like, oh, just wait for that other shoe to drop. Like, just wait for something bad to happen, because it does, because it is going to at some point. And this is my little ailment right now. So I'm a bit bummed. Obviously, London is great. It's still well worth the trip that I've taken to come and everything that's happening with it for sure. But it is also not exactly what I had imagined or planned. So stay tuned for a big London episode, because anybody that knows me and knew me well during that period of time that I lived here in like 2017 to 2019, that was actually a really, really dark part of my eating disorder. And so being back here and that experience of being here well, and I don't know, sort of like healing a couple of little parts, it's been a really interesting experience, and I'll talk more about that in the London episode. So stay tuned for that. And yeah, today I have this is part 1 of 2 in another interview that I did with my therapist, Lakshmi. And this one centers around, is recovery actually possible? Because you will see things out there that say, oh, you will kind of always have these thoughts, or, oh, you will always keep a little bit of your eating disorder. And so many people do. So many people do. And so many people believe that like you actually can't really fully recover. But what I think, and what Lakshmi and I will end up talking about, is that it is possible. It is possible. It's not guaranteed, because you have to do it. You have to actually go through all the way in order to achieve it. But it is possible. And her method and the way that she thinks about eating disorders and the way that she talks about recovery and walks people out of this is profound and unique, and I think really important. And as a fun little bonus at the beginning of this episode, Lakshmi shares a good chunk of sort of her personal story and how she came to be where she is doing this work, which is so cool. And, I'm just so lucky to have her, and was very lucky to have her on this podcast. So this will be part 1 of the interview, because Lakshmi and I, when we get going, it goes and goes. And so to make this a digestible length episode, this will be in 2 parts. So we get into it, and enjoy the episode. Lakshmi, welcome to the Uncovery podcast. I'm so happy that you are here. And I want to start by having you tell me a little bit about yourself. Tell people how you came into this work, who you are, what you do.
Okay. Thank you, Maddie. Thank you for having me here. This is a new experience for me, but I guess I'm a podcaster now. So Maddie knows me as an eating disorder therapist, and that's actually a very odd, mantle, a very odd thing for me. Sometimes I pause to reflect that, whoa, I'm a therapist in Canada, and an eating disorder expert at this point. How did I get here? So I try to make the story short. I never can, but I'm going to be really concise here. I'll start off saying this. I was born in the Middle East, and I was there for 9 years because my father worked there. And I never understood the significance of that till much later. The significance of that is the British were at the time still in the Middle East for oil exploration. So I went to a British school. I lived in a British township with streets and avenues, but surrounded by Indian families who all worked in this little township for the school, for the hospital, etc. My father worked in the hospital in administration, and he played tennis every day. And it was just a very mixed, there was a mosque down the road because it was Kuwait. So it was a very, very mixed childhood. I just knew myself as a little Indian girl who went to a British school, who lived in a Muslim country, right? And that was normal. I realized much later that was how I knew myself. And then when I was 9, my parents decided, my father retired, the British people handed over the government to the Kuwaiti government and left. So we left and went. So I used to say went back to India, and I realized I didn't go back.
You'd never been there.
I went.
Yeah.
I wasn't born there. I hadn't lived there, right? We just went on vacation. So my parents went back, and I went with them to this tiny town in the south of India. And the significance of that was I realized I was an outsider. Nobody treated me badly. It's not that. I just looked on everything from the outside because it was different, and I knew it was different. And looking back, I think I quickly decided, oh, this world is too small. It was too small. It was very homogeneous, and it was very small. I talk about standing in assembly in the middle of our compound. You know, it was a convent with everything from kindergarten to graduation from college, right? So I got my bachelor's degree in science, in zoology and chemistry in the same compound. So in the middle of this huge compound was this assembly place. Anyway, and it would be like, I don't know, like 2,000 heads with black hair. We all had black hair and brown eyes. And I was just like, it was so boring, the homogeneity of it. I was like, no, I want more. I need to get out of here. That was my thought. Like, you know, it was okay. I am grateful for, you know, knowing, you know, for growing up in a very traditional, spending time, let's say, in a very traditional, you know, getting to know my grandmother, getting to know the way my grandmother was. And I have to mention her because my grandmother was kind of my role model. She was widowed at 46. She ran the whole show herself. I never thought about her as a single woman. I thought about her as widowed. But she was a single woman, and she was very opinionated and, you know, read the newspaper every day. She had opinions about everything. So when I look at myself, I'm like, oh, no surprise. Like, you know, I mean, of course, I have opinions. Just like her, you know, I think that as time goes by or generations go by, we think we are so different, but we're not really. So yes. So then I grew up the rest of my time in India thinking consciously and unconsciously, how am I going to get out of here? Because the rest of the world is out there, and how do I get out and travel and again be among people, right? But a wider amongness. So anyway, grow up, get married. I you know, in talking about myself, I'll say this because I think it contributes greatly to me being a therapist and the kind of therapist I am. When I was 19, I think it would be unfair to not mention my mother. When I was 19, I was living a fairly peaceful life. My parents, my brother, and myself. My mother got diagnosed with breast cancer. And that was not the terrible thing. So we quickly went over to the next town. She had a mastectomy, and they advised radiation. In those days, so 1984 in India, in a government hospital. Long story short, she was given too much radiation, which kind of microwaved the left side of her body, and she died in great pain and pretty terribly at the age of 48. She did not want to die. We had no social workers or palliative care or anything of the sort. So, you know, you wallow in your miserable feelings. So when we talk about therapy and feelings and all of that, all I remember is you kind of had to resource yourself any which way. There was no library or bookstore in my tiny town for English books. I mean, there were other, you know, our local language books, Malayalam, but no English books, no philosophy, you know, like, so I'm just like at 19 wandering around in thinking existentially, but I didn't even know the word existential. I didn't know there was a whole philosophy around it. But just having really great existential attachment conundrums, you know, like my bubble had been burst. I was questioning how this happened. How could God, is there a God? Walking around thinking you can lose everything. Like you think you're fine today, you can die tomorrow, right? And I talk this way, and my friends always look at me like, oh, Lakshmi is intense, but
she's intense. She's very broody.
She just suddenly starts talking about dying, but it's such a reality. It is such a reality in my life. So I kind of weigh things in that way. I kind of think about, you know, it's very real. So what am I going to regret if I don't do it in my life? And that actually sets my compass a certain way. So then after that, I get married, I have children, we travel, go to Kuwait, and then come to Canada. And when I came to Canada, so when I was in Kuwait, I happened to go on a Terry Fox run with this Canadian psychologist who told me about psychology.
As one does.
As one does. And this is the first time I came across the idea of psychology and what the heck that is. As I only knew about psychiatry, I thought about, that's all we had in India at the time, like where I lived. So it was like if you had schizophrenia, they would put you in a mental hospital and there were psychiatrists. I didn't know about the in-between of the whole continuum of mental health and psychology was something I didn't know about. So I come to Canada. So I have this conversation and I think, and somewhere in there, my mother-in-law had cancer and died, and I took care of her and helped her die peacefully, which was, I'm going to say, a repairing experience after the way my mother died. And I was in my early 30s. So I could make more sense of it. And I had this feeling I have something to offer. I just don't know what the heck it is, right? So I come to Canada and I go to the university in Calgary to find out, what does one do to become a psychologist?
Right.
And I met with a psychologist and she mentioned social work. And so then I went to the university. I got my bachelor's and master's as quick as I could. And then looking around for a job, and I realized I wanted to be a therapist. Family therapy was vaguely on the periphery of my attention. I just thought it made so much sense, but I didn't have any much training in it. And then because I badly wanted to be a counselor, I was applying wildly and got a job at the eating disorder program in 2007.
So you just kind of found yourself in the eating disorder space. It wasn't an intentional...
Accident. The whole thing is an accident.
The whole thing.
So,
Wow.
So the program had a great reputation at the time. And and I had only met one person. In my previous practicum at Calgary Family Services, I met one person. She was a nurse who told me that she had bulimia, and she would, just told me eating disorder behaviors. And I, in talking to her and trying to understand what she's talking about, I made sense that whenever she was activated, she had emotions that activated her in her relationship. And we talked about her childhood and some memories she had. And I thought, this is what she does when she gets activated.
Right.
I had this much of an understanding. So when I went to the eating disorder program, I got hired because I was trained in therapy, the basics, and I also had experience working as a social worker in the hospital. So I was hired into the inpatient unit at Foothills to work there. And then all I can say is it was a steep learning curve because I didn't understand the comments that people were making. I didn't understand about running up and down the stairs. I didn't understand why somebody was getting upset about half a banana. I did not understand these things. And I had to learn all the workings of an eating disorder. And I have to say, I felt supported by a team that had set up this program. And we would talk the philosophy of the program all the time.
Right.
So we would talk about philosophy. We would talk about ways to improve the program. We would talk about what made sense, adjusting the rules, blah, 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 all that stuff. So it was a great learning place. I worked there for 6 years. I learned a lot. And then left the program, and because I wanted to continue working with eating disorders, I started, again, another accident. I started my private practice in the community, and I thought, hey, what the heck, I'll see a couple of clients. I just want to stay in touch with the clients I have, and I will see them on a Saturday, let's say, So started with a couple of clients on a Saturday in an office downtown. And it was ongoing learning, right? I feel like what the program did set me up for doing was working with clients of all ages and not compartmentalizing in my mind. So if there was a child with an eating disorder, I'm going to work with the family. If I got a 35-year-old with an eating disorder, I'm still going to do family therapy, but I don't necessarily need the parents in the room.
Right.
But I'm still thinking, so creating a blueprint for therapy in my head, and how am I going to go about this, right? And that's what I got from the program. Also, running groups with all ages and all diagnoses, right?
Right.
And so one of the things I was telling somebody the other day is the compartments in the mind of the therapist is a problem, right? So what goes on in my mind as the clinician who is directing therapy is any limitation or compartmentalization in my mind is going to be a limitation for the client,
Right.
for the recovery process. Right? So if I put all the anorexics in one box and all the binge eating people in one box, and there are boxes in my head, I'm not going to go deeper
Right.
to understand that all of those presentations come from the same place. And that's the joining place.
Yeah.
And then even clients start not putting themselves in a box. So when I run a group with an anorexic person and a bulimia person and a binge eating person, and we can all talk about the same thing, and they all hear each other, then they are being among, right? Going with this idea of being among, they are less in a box.
Right. Yes. So the idea that therapy is sort of like a panacea, and that there's one blueprint, and then we use skills and we do frameworks and we recover that way. Your approach is quite different from that. Your approach is extremely individual and has a lot to do with the constellation of family around the individual with the eating disorder.
It's I always like to see the commonality. So if you put me in Russia, I'm going to find somebody I can talk to. Because there are going to be 100 things that are common between us, right? Because that person is a person and I'm a person, and that person has a family and I have a family, and families work in so many ways, and children need so many things to do well in the world. This is kind of in a very loose way, but I think my nature, the point of telling that whole story about myself is, I think when I was in Kuwait as a child, I was different. And there were a whole bunch of people who were different like me. Then when I went to India with my parents, I was supposed to blend. Because, my parents went back to the town where they came from, and I'm a little girl from, technically, with my parents belonging, I'm supposed to belong. And I was telling somebody the other day, I don't have the belonging my parents have. And I saw my ancestral town from the outside. And it made me a great observer.
Yeah.
And so I'm an observer, and I feel a little bit on the outside all the time. I come to Canada and I know I'm a little bit on the outside. But I live in my difference. I sort of kind of enjoy it a bit, because I can always be a little outside and be a watcher, and it allows me to be somewhat neutral or somewhat objective. But I can also find the similarities between us. And I think that is a huge, strength contribution I have, is that I can sit with a teenager and I remember my teenage. Like, this is nothing unusual for me. I remember the awkwardness. I remember what it felt like. I remember the confusion of being a teenager. I remember this. I can sit with a group of eating disorder clients, and we all know what anxiety feels like. We all know what sadness feels like. When I hear someone's story, I can kind of come alongside, right?
Yeah.
I don't know exactly what it's like for that person, and I'm careful not to assume. So I ask questions, right? I ask 100 questions. And I'll tell the person, I don't want to make any assumptions. And I'm often surprised by the answers that people give. But we can, I'm thinking about, these cliche words of empathize, resonate. We all have these feelings if we live in the world of feelings.
Right. Yeah.
and that's where we find common ground. So have I had an eating disorder in my life? No. But often I'll say, when I explain to parents, all of us have a relationship with food. And when we are stressed, all of us do one of a few things with food. No one just keeps on going on when they're stressed and then they just eat the same things. No, when people are stressed, they do some funny things. I might lose personally, I lose my appetite. As in, I lose taste in my mouth, my stomach still feels hungry.
Right.
And I know that I should eat, so I will eat without taste.
Right.
Maybe I'll pick the things I like. Or I might, I tend to go back to some of the things I ate in childhood when I'm stressed and I feel like I want to eat those things because it feels, I don't know, comforting or easy. There are people who eat more when they are stressed, and that's all within what we call the normal range. And an eating disorder is just an exaggeration of, the ends of, the two ends of that normal range.
Right.
So that's not very hard to understand.
Yeah.
If I have a ton of anxiety and I start getting addicted to the empty feeling in my stomach, and that somehow makes me feel safe, I have to stretch my mind a little bit, but that's not so hard for me to understand, right?
Right. Yeah. You don't have to have had lived experience in order to be an extraordinary therapist.
Right.
Yeah.
And I have something to offer in that I can tell you that you can live without this eating disorder. Life is possible.
Yes.
Right?
Which is exactly what I kind of want to talk about. And maybe it'll help to kind of set the stage of how you came to be my therapist, which I'll just briefly say.
Yes.
So you have always run groups through the Silver Linings Foundation.
Yes.
And I was part of those groups, even in my kind of what I'll call first round of recovery. And I would come to these groups and you would talk about different things. And some of it was family related. And I just remember always sitting there and being like, oh, it's so cute that like other people have like problems with their parents or in their families. Like, oh, I'm so like exempt from this narrative because like my parents love me. And not realizing until much later that like there is.
I mean, they do. Let's just
clarify.
Clarify that they do.
They do. Yeah. Absolutely, they do. But that it doesn't mean that there isn't any type of family dynamic that can impact the way that you got to be the way that you are with your anxiety and then your eating disorder. Let's just put that there. But I had flown away to London, and that whole half-baked going out into the world, not ready eating disorder wise, the wheels falling off, relapse being quite severe. Eventually I make my way back to Calgary in Canada. And at that point, I'm too ashamed to go back to my therapist that I had before.
Yeah.
Because I felt like I had completely failed in my recovery and I could not bring myself to text her or to get in and to see her again. But I did have the wherewithal, or at least wanted to perform as though I was like willing to try recovery again because, my parents are always worried about me and I'm probably like, okay, well, I'm going to sign up for group at least. I'm going to go back to group. So I go to group and I'm there for a couple sessions and, we're kind of introducing ourselves and you're wondering, I'm back, like, oh, Maddie, you're back kind of a thing. And what's going on? And I'm like, well, I'm afraid to see my therapist, but I'm here at group. And I had really fallen off the wagon. Like I had really, like it was visibly, I was not well. And I just, after group one day, we were putting the chairs away in the church basement. And you were like, Maddie, are you seeing a therapist? Just like this little gentle. And I was like, well, no, not really. I'm kind of afraid to go back and all this. And I'm like, oh, okay. And one day you text me and it just says, Maddie, I think that we should book an appointment. And I was like, well, I don't want her to be mad at me. So I'm going to say, yeah, I don't want to let Lakshmi down. Like I probably do need this. It's a way for me to get back into therapy without having to like have my tail between my legs and go back to my other therapist or whatever I had made up would happen. So I start coming to you. And in the very first couple sessions, we were talking a lot about family, which I still wasn't even bought into as like a thing to talk about in order to recover, because I had been under sort of a therapeutic relationship that was much more based around, okay, what's your cognitive limit to like what's uncomfortable for you? And then let's just push it one step further and let's just keep doing that over and over. That's what I had been used to. And this idea of how did you get here? Let's unpack all of this environmental family stuff. I was very, very skeptical at the beginning, but I was equally skeptical of you saying that by doing this, by understanding this, we can just sort of walk you out of your eating disorder. And I remember you saying the sentence, we just kind of walk you out of it. And I was like, I couldn't even wrap my head around that being possible, that it could be explained that simply, much less done. And so that's just sort of like an aside, but that's how I came to be in a therapeutic relationship with you. And now looking back on all of these years now, because it's been a few years, all of it is true, obviously. You knew, I didn't. But that approach to we do these things and we sort of walk out of the eating disorder, I feel is a very unique take. But the fundamental of it is that recovery and full recovery and actually walking out of your eating disorder is indeed possible. So I know that's a lot to say, but the difference in your approach and the way that you come at therapy for an eating disorder, I think is a really important and unique one that I'd love to have you speak a little bit more about.
Yeah. So often when I say that, I get very serious when I talk about this, so no one thinks that I'm saying anything magical. This is not cheerleading. This is not saying something nice because it sounds nice. It's not something, there is no magic in it. I really, really like to keep it non-magical. And it's not a promise, right? It's not a promise. It's a possibility. I'm talking about a possibility, and I'm talking about a possibility because I'll tell you the theory behind what I'm saying. It's backed by theory, right? So often when I train students, I'll say the only thing that keeps me grounded in the therapy room is my knowledge of theory, right? It's my knowledge of theory. And I have spent a lot of time going for trainings and listening to people in the theory world, picking and choosing the theories I want to train in to understand the blocks when I hit a block with somebody, right? So I'm sitting in front of a client and they're telling me, if I think about my early days as a therapist, learning, right? So I'm sitting and talking to somebody and they tell me something and I'm like, I don't know how to understand this. I remember the first time I sat with a 50-year-old woman, not eating disorder. She came to see me when I was a student. It's so sad when you're a student and you're a student and you have a client in front of you and you kind of want to offer them more and you can't. And she was talking about not having self-esteem. And I remember feeling completely lost about where I was going to find her some self-esteem. How do you
check under the bed?
how do you find this, right? What is this, So I'll speak a little to the theory behind it and what allows me to say it. It doesn't matter what age a person is at, the presence of unconstructive behavior, right? So it could be an addiction, it could be cutting, it could be an eating disorder. Someone is holding on to an unconstructive behavior to soothe their dysregulation or anxiety, right? And anxiety, at the front end, I'll explain to people, anxiety is something we all have. But there are people and times in our lives, in anybody's life, when anxiety can go to a higher level where it starts interfering with my functioning. And that's when we get diagnosed with anxiety and they say, oh, maybe a pill will help or a pill and therapy will help because now the anxiety, which we all have, is getting in the way.
Right.
It's like thinking I had a cold, but now I'm realizing that I have COVID. Right? And so now we need to kind of think about something has to be done here. But that anxiety very early, if my dysregulation is higher than I can do anything with, and I have to figure it out myself for whatever reason, I will start trying to regulate myself with the first thing that comes along. So maybe I'm 14 and I run into my friend who offers me some pot. Maybe I'm 14 and I run into a friend or somebody who offers me, I don't know, something stronger. Maybe I play video games, right? That's how I soothe myself. And maybe I think I'll lose 10 pounds. And somehow that makes me feel like I'm doing something. And, the thing about an eating disorder is when I lose 5 pounds at a certain time, somebody might say, oh, you look so good. And that little comment tells me I'm on the right track.
Yeah.
Or maybe I have a mom who's been trying to lose 5 pounds forever, right? Or a dad.
Yeah.
Maybe, we already have this language of healthy hanging around in our house. And healthy in the eating disorder world is not a good word because it signifies fear of certain words, of foods, right?
Yep.
We are afraid of what carbohydrates can do. We are afraid of what sugar can do. And that comes from somewhere else with our parents. So, maybe my grandma was, overweight or my grandma was anorexic. I don't know. This goes way back.
Yeah.
So there is just the relationship with anxiety, and then there is food layering on top of it.
Yes.
And when we talk about anxiety, attachment theory, this thing without which I don't know how any of us understand life. Small children have anxiety by default. That's what I would think. Gordon Neufeld will talk about, a series of separations. So my first separation from my mother, from complete enmeshed dependence inside the uterus, is when I'm born. Right. I am born and I have to breathe for myself and I have to digest milk for myself.
It's cold out here.
It's cold. It is cold. Yeah. Yeah. And, depending on how the delivery went, depending on how the pregnancy went, we don't talk about these things because it makes everything too complex. And we don't like complex things. We don't. So, we try to find quick solutions for things. And some things are just way too big and deep for quick solutions. So every separation has to be handmaidened. Otherwise, it is a threshold of anxiety. So a baby requires a restful mom. And Gordon Neufeld will say, in the absence of restfulness, we have restlessness, right? Yeah. So restlessness is just a feeling of something not being okay in my body. If my parents are too distracted or too busy or depressed or something, as parents can be, they might not look at me with delight every time I run around. And every teaspoon of delight is what builds into self-esteem.
Yes.
I am special, right? I am special just because. Not even because my mom told me. It's because of the way she looked at me.
Right.
Right? This is the silent, very significant world of attachment, is every small thing that goes on and that children internalize in their bodies before the brain is coherently articulate, right? Before the brain knows how to make up stories and sentences. The other day I was listening to The Developing Mind by Daniel Siegel, and he's talking about the developing mind, right? And nature and nurture. Mm-hmm. And he made a comment which I thought, he said, we talk about the stomach as the second brain. Mm-hmm. And he said the stomach is actually full functioning way long before my brain catches up. My actual brain.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So my actual brain is still growing exponentially between 0 and 3.
Yeah.
Because, if people know we are born with this unfinished brain, that's why we can't even crawl, because the human head would be too big and we would never come out. So, big heads. So the stomach is already feeling and functioning way before my brain catches up. So I think about the stomach as the first brain, and whenever I have a feeling in my body, my feelings and my stomach have a relationship way before I can put words to it. And therefore I do funny things with food, and somehow it makes sense when I don't eat, when I feel anxiety in my stomach.
Right.
Right? Right. So when we talk about regulating anxiety, When I worked at the hospital in the children's mental health program, I wrote a little thing for just before I write every report, I would put it at the top. And I would say, children cannot self regulate. They have to be co regulated by a regulated adult in their life, right? So we need a regulated adult who is not afraid of emotions, who see emotions in the child and knows how to be with and ride the wave of the emotion. And when that is done, like 450,000 times, I evolve into an adult who can tolerate a difficult emotion in my body because I know it will get better. I know it will pass, right? But at 13, when a child is flailing around to find a resource for my anxiety, which is not being taken care of for whatever reason, and I get a hold of an eating disorder, the eating disorder is so convincing and so effective, I don't know myself in my adult self at all without this eating disorder. And I'm going to say to somebody, okay, let's loosen our grip on this eating disorder and we'll slowly replace these other things. It can be done.
Yeah.
This is going to be a bit of push and pull.
Yes.
But it can be done. And I think the significance of me saying it can be done is I put myself in my client's position. So when I worked at the program at the Children's Hospital, we would get these difficult clients. I think about some of them with amusement. And difficult children and difficult clients always amused me because my mother called me a difficult child, because I used to ask a lot of questions.
Oh, wow.
So I was a little girl in India who, there are very clear rules on how you be, and I will write this down in a book someday.
Yes.
The most important thing is learning how to not say no. Mm-hmm. Because when you're at my time, arranged marriages were the thing, and everyone in my family had an arranged marriage. And when they put a boy in front of me and my family said, this is the boy, the right thing to do would be to say yes. Right? So I was a child who asked way too many questions. I was very compliant. There was nowhere to go in my town, right? I was stuck in my house with my parents. But my mother was very anxious for me. My mother was very, very concerned because I read a lot of books and I would keep on asking why. Mm-hmm. Why not? And it's not why, it's like, why not?
Yes.
So she would tell my father almost every other day that something bad is going to happen because this girl does not know how to keep quiet, right? And today I kind of joke that, I have made it a profession.
Yeah.
I make money asking why,
Yeah.
and it comes so naturally to me that it's so easy. But I would look at my difficult clients, right? The clients who were difficult, who asked a lot of questions. Why only one ketchup? Why can I have 2 peppers and only 1 salt? Why can't I have peanut butter? Why can't I change my peach yogurt to strawberry yogurt? Why does it have to be this way? And I would think this is a good thing. She has agency, right? She's not compliant. Because compliance does not work very well in the real world.
Right.
And I tell parents, if you have obedient children, they are not going to learn how to be leaders. They will be followers. Right? Children in their teenage learn how to ask questions and think critically by pushing against the parents who are the frontliners, right. And that is a part of growing up. That is a part of differentiation. And so I would tell the clients always, I need you to ask questions. I need you to ask, why do we have these rules?
Yeah.
I need you to understand why we have these rules. I do not want you to be compliant.
Yeah.
Right? Because compliance asks you to give up your agency. And without agency, you are not going to hear your own voice. Right? Like I have to think for myself. And I have to, that period of teenage that got frozen when an eating disorder came in, my fear got connected to these behaviors, and now we're frozen because I'm in my little cocoon doing my behaviors over and over and over, has not allowed for me to evolve into an adult.
Yeah.
And the evolution into adulthood, like, there are 60-year-olds who are not adults, right? In that sense, right? People who are afraid to follow their agency. that has to happen.
Right.
So, and it can, right? When I learned how to, I can. A feeling went by, but I don't have to collapse.
Right.
I don't have to lose my mind. I don't have to go and lose 5 pounds because a feeling went by. And inside my body, I still feel the fear I felt when I was 5. But hey, I am 35. In that moment, I forgot that I'm 35.
Right.
So one day I told Maddie to go and walk around her apartment and say, I'm 33 and pass.
I did do it. I did it. I came home and I was like, for the whole week, I would just sort of walk around here and I would just sort of be like, I'm 33. I'm 33 and I'm doing this. And what does a 33-year-old do and experience and feel like? What does it feel like to be a 33-year-old me? And part of that stemmed from, what does it mean to have a 33-year-old body?
Yeah.
Because when you've restricted and kept yourself small, you don't go through what your body was supposed to go through in your, let's say, late teens into your 20s. I never experienced what it was like to have a 23-year-old Maddie sized body, or a 24 or a 25, 26. And so then to crash land in a 33-year-old Maddie sized body is a shock to the system.
Yeah.
And you realize very quickly that that's actually very much tied to what is the emotional experience of a 33-year-old and what is the life experience of a 33-year-old. And how can we bring those two things together finally after all of this time of complete disconnect? Yeah.
And crash land is true. Like that's what happened to you. You crash landed into a 33-year-old body. Internally, I am not registering that, right? Internally, I'm not registering that I am 35, that I am 45. Internally, I am still afraid of those emotions that I felt in my body when I was 5, and they were way bigger than my 5-year-old body. After my grandson was born, and he's going to be 8, but I have watched him grow in a more conscious way than when I watch my children grow. And I watch him, and when he was really tiny, when he was 1 year old, 2 years old, he would have these big emotions. And his body was way too small to contain them. Like the emotions kind of flow it's coming out of his ears, right? And he can't, it's bigger than his body.
The container is too small. The
container
is too small.
Yes, and so when you pick him up, when I would pick him up or his mom would pick him up, we are picking his body and all his emotions. He doesn't have to carry the weight of them, right? And we take and put him on our lap and we rock him a little bit and we say, and slow heartbeat, and we say, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. And he's learning in his body, an emotion felt really big, and then I got carried. And then my grandma or my mother, who are gods in my life, right? Because I'm tiny, the 4 walls of my house is the universe, and there are a couple of gods moving around inside.
They're a whole world.
And they come and pick me up, and they tell me it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
And that voice is inside, right? It's very timely. Like, these interventions have to happen in a timely fashion, right? So I get scared, I get out of my body scared, and then someone comes and picks me up and says, it's okay, and rocks me back and forth, soothing, and it's okay, right? So this happening over and over and over and over and over, and me being noticed, and kind of in attachment, it's like, should we do this 100% of the time? No, you don't have to resign your job and sit at home and do this. But for the most part, and this is a non-negotiable, this has to happen to create an adult who can now launch from home or fly away and say, when I feel an emotion going by, I know it's just going by.
Yeah.
Or I can call my mom.
Yeah.
I just need to hear her voice on the phone. But I can function.
I can navigate this.
Yeah, I can navigate this. My anxiety is not going to stop my life, right? And we slowly resource ourselves as we go forward to carry bigger and bigger things. So when I meet someone at 35, I'm like, oh, we haven't caught up.
Right.
But I have to tell you, like a lighthouse, I have to tell you this is possible. We're not like Tom Hanks in Castaway in an island where we're never going to escape from. I don't know if remember that movie.
I do. Oh, I
loved
loved
him
that
sitting and
movie.
talking to Nelson. No, we're not going to sit on the island talking to your eating disorder for the rest of your life.
Right.
There is light. This is possible.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
how do you communicate that to somebody that is very, very early stages, doesn't believe that that's possible? How do you actually create that possibility for somebody?
So initially, me as an evolving therapist, I considered the idea, right? I go to 10,000 trainings and I'm like poking around. And I remember when I was a new therapist on the team, we had a client who was the same age as me. So she was in her mid-late 40s. And she would constantly come back to hospital, and severe anorexia. And I remember asking the psychiatrist at that time, like, is she going to get better? Like, what are we working on, right? Are we maintaining her, or can she recover?
Right.
And I didn't know. I didn't know the answer at that time. And I remember him saying, to me, and I'm going to say today, looking back, I don't think he had a clear idea of the path to recovery. But he said, can she do it? Yeah, probably. Will she do it? I don't know, right? Good news is, I saw her recently. She did.
Yeah.
Part of it is magic, I feel sometimes.
Yeah.
But she did. But I didn't know, And so walking with, right? So many of those early clients, I couldn't offer that certainty. I couldn't say it because I didn't have the certainty. I didn't know what was possible. But then as time went on, and my theoretical footing got more solid, And I'm going to say I came to therapy late, my own therapy. So just for life stuff, right?
All good therapists should have their own therapist.
My mother dying when I was 19, I came to therapy like 25 years later. But feeling change in myself and experiencing shifts, emotion shifts in myself. And walking beside. And if I really think about it, when did I start saying it? I don't know. I'm going to say maybe like the last 8, halfway through, is when I started thinking, I think this is possible.
Right.
Because I can actually see the blueprint.
You can see it, and you are watching it happen. You are watching people get out of this.
Now, yes.
The evidence is building, which makes it more believable for you, which then makes it more believable for your clients.
Yes.
Because if you can believe it, like if you come into a therapeutic relationship, if your therapist doesn't actually think you can recover, what the hell am I doing here? Do you know what I mean?
Well, it's really hard. This is what I was thinking about. If I was one of those questioning difficult clients.
Me for a while.
You were not. I think about this one client I had long ago, and I know peripherally somebody told me that she's well and she's, in her life now. But I think about her because she was such a questioning girl, all over the place and protesting. And I had a soft spot for her. And I would think about I would often joke to the clients that if I was a client in this program, I would be one of those very difficult clients because I would I would want to know why.
100%.
But why? I don't understand why I can't, something. And I wanted answers. And it helped for me to be that kind of coming from being a difficult child. When I was in the program and I was being trained, I wanted to know why, right? How did the rules make sense? And back in the day, the program was in early days, and we were being trained by Josie Geller from BC, and she would come and do trainings, and there were answers for all these questions, why is it this way? Why is this? And there were non-negotiables in treatment. And it was like, why is this a non-negotiable? What is the meaning of this, right? Why is day treatment set up this way? Why does it have to? Why is there reflection week? And it really helped when I understood it. I could explain it to the clients. When they understood it, it was like, oh, then now we're all on the same page, right?
Because a lot of us are really looking for answers in therapy, right?
Yes.
Like the main component of the eating disorder and going into recovery, the main emotion, it's fear-based. We are very afraid of what we do not know that is coming. And so we are desperately, desperately seeking some kind of certainty in answers about the future, especially when it comes to recovery. When will I stop gaining weight? When will I stop being bloated and uncomfortable? When will I make peace with my body? When will I know that I'm done? How long is this going to take? What is this going to feel like? So having reasoning about why it is that we do the things that we do is helpful in some regard. And then the rest of it is blind faith.
And, I really like to, when I talk to clients or parents, families, I like to think about this in a way that we can understand. When you say, Maddie, it's fear-based, I'm like, people without eating disorders don't do well with fear either. Mm-hmm. Nobody does well with fear, and everybody wants to know when, how much. So I'm like, nothing unusual here.
Right.
It's just that my eating disorder clients have their fear hooked into something that is really not serving them well.
Right.
And when I tell my clients it's not serving you, they agree. No one disagrees.
Yeah, like no one is like, my life is so much better with an eating disorder.
No one is saying, people are just honest to say, this eating disorder has served me well. It's not, I'm beginning to see where it's getting in the way, and it's getting in the way of all my other relationships. It's not serving me well, but I'm afraid. And we validate that, right? And we acknowledge it and say, we acknowledge it and, right? I am scared and. So I have this thing of saying recovery is a series of freakouts,
Yes.
and I say that at the front end because I'm like, you're going to freak out once, then you're going to freak out again, then you're going to freak out again. But you know what? Soon you will know what to do with freakouts, and that's the solution.